The first question is from Tracy in New Zealand. And Tracy, I didn't mention in the number of countries that were listening in New Zealand, and my mother, who is a Kiwi, would be very unhappy. And Her Royal Highness has just come back from New Zealand, and we hope, Tracy, that you haven't been too affected by the extraordinary weather conditions that you guys have been experiencing both in the North and the South Island. So your question is, how do we manage the transition of land use, land management and land ownership structures and processes in response to climate change while maintaining productivity and profitability? And perhaps, Kenny, are you in a position to talk about this transition of land use, land management and land ownership in response to climate change?
Well, I think this is a tough question when it comes to Singapore. For those who don't really understand Singapore, the farmers don't own the land, our government do. So we are at the mercy of our government. All the land belongs to them. They give us pretty short lease term, and that's the battle that we have been fighting year after year, to prolong. Because if we are really serious about food security, why the land can't be a permanent space for agriculture? But because as a small city-state itself, where land is scarce, a lot of times itself is very difficult for them to prioritize their usage. And farmers over the last 50 over years definitely has seen in Singapore that they have actually been pushed further and further away from the town or the city. The unfortunate thing about Singapore is that we do not have a hinterland. So right now we are literally at the specific spot whereby whatever that we have done to our own land, we are now have to retake back and rethink, reimagine, and how do we put agriculture back into our own space? Because we have taken away all the agricultural land to build Singapore to what we are today. So I think that is going to be a huge challenge for farmers, really. So I can't really answer that question because climate change has changed a lot of things, right? Government also realized that we can't be dependent on the soy-based vegetable farmers who are highly dependent on the weather. And Singapore itself, for those who have been to Singapore, we have two weathers, very wet or very dry. So we have no snow, we have no 4 seasons. But having said that, farmers are now having a disillusion year calendar because the months they're supposed to be dry and warm, it rains. And then months that are not supposed to rain, it just have drought. Like just basically no rain for a period of 2 weeks. And that created a lot of big kind of problems to all the farmers there, especially in the soy-based industry. So I think climate change definitely have created a fair bit, but think about it from another perspective. So what do we do in the city? We start to push everybody indoors. So we started high-tech farming, etc., etc. But we are not, even though we are not at the mercy of climate change, but we are at the mercy of many, many other environments that is affecting farmers. The war, for example, have created a change in terms of disruption. Utility bills itself for high-tech farmers in Singapore that usually occupies 30% of their costs have ramped up to 50%, eating up all their margins that they have, all right, literally in their whole business arena. So if you ask me, the climate change really has a big impact. And if you talk about land management in terms of transferring how that is done, unfortunately, I can't answer that from a Singapore perspective because the way we run it is very different from other countries. Yeah.
Thanks, Kenny. And while perhaps extending it a bit, I lived in Singapore for a bit, about 15 years. Now, the main shopping street is Orchard Road, and the road off it's Orange Grove Road. And I asked, well, why is it called Orchard Road and Orange Grove Road? Because that's where Orange Groves used to be, but it's all high-rise now. So tell me, Kenny, is vertical farming, which you're famous for, is that something that is only relevant to places where land is limited?
I don't think we have a choice, frankly. So if you really look at vertical farming, as a farmer, is it a wrong thing to go into high productivity yield production? The answer is definitely a yes, that we need to go high tech. But as I've shared earlier itself, if you look at vertical farms in Singapore, many of us actually have to invest heavily in the infrastructure, and then you have to wait for the returns of investments at a much later stage. But the economy in terms of the environment itself is currently not robust. Remember what I shared earlier, that we still import 90% of our food. So vertical farm, to me, nobody would say no. So let me put it in another context for everybody. Food security is complex, right? We need to solve many problems, whether from the production to the demand to the sales. But at the end of the day itself, farmers still need to be sustainable. So there's no wrong in high-tech farming. Every cities will definitely go into that. I have friends currently from New York just came to me, and they say that they have a very robust urban farmers in New York City right now. All the farmers are very excited. Then we have friends in Australia that's telling me that the cities, the youngsters are getting very excited going into farming as well. So you can see there's a growing interest, but I think the realism itself is that it takes the whole ecosystem. Whichever cities they're in, are we ready as a city? Do the people really buy local? Are they spoiled for choice, or do they still want choice? So I think that is the question we have to ask ourselves, that whether how can we actually do that? So right now we have ramped up in terms of number of startups of high-tech farms in Singapore. Over the last 2 years, we have easily 30 to 40 high-tech farmers right now. But if you ask me, are they sustainable? I would say let's wait and see. It's still a long way for them to really see results.
Thanks, Kenny. Leona, you mentioned that farmers don't have the right to farm. And both yourself and Kenny have said that you're importing 90% of food. What percentage of could it be? What in the long term? What self-sufficiency do you think would be possible in your area?
I think in the Yukon, it might not be 100% probable of reaching 100% self-sufficiency. But with that said, I mean, baby steps. If we work in the next 5, 10 years to produce another 5%, another 10%, and work our way, I guess, upwards and forwards, then we'll get somewheres. And we are. I think in the last 5 years, there's been 3 new farmers that have diversified in offering. We can get farm fresh eggs that are produced just in my neighbor here, indoor poultry operation, as well as we've had a few hydroponic greenhousing initiatives start up, and I think that there's greater potential if we're able to try new things. So looking at heritage breeds for cattle, and also heritage seeds. So I'm going to try a mixture of a new grass seed, a new forage seed here this spring, and seeding some Anik alfalfa. And Anik alfalfa is a Siberian variety that's known to grow well in the north, but in the Yukon, alfalfa hasn't grown very well in the past because of the short growing season. But we definitely have an intense growing season of that 3 months. So in the summer, we pretty much get 24 hours of sunlight, and that's plants grow in a hurry as long as they have a little bit of moisture. So for those farms that are able to set up an irrigation system and water their crops, so our soils are about a class 3, not 1 or 2, but you work at it. And like Anna said earlier, it's not focusing on the monocropping. It's trying to enhance your soils so that they'll be better for you in the long run. So it's a work in progress, and we'll see where we get to be in the next few years.
Well, thanks, Leona. That question of heritage seeds is an interesting one. I know Kew Gardens here have a huge seed bank, and they've been helping various countries in Africa with seeds that they've got in their bank here, and getting them back to areas that have been that have not been growing heritage crops into growing them. So, Anna, if I can, just jumping back to the first question, which was essentially about the impact of climate change. Can you tell us what the impact of climate change is in Zambia, and its impact on you as a smaller farmer?
Excuse me. The impact of climate change in Zambia is high. Right now, thousands of hectares are immersed in water through floods. This will result in hunger and starvation. in these coming months. So as Zambia, as a country, we are looking at the tools which can help us reduce the impact of climate change. We are thinking of those farmers who are in lowland. They should be taken to highlands where, even if we have a lot of floods in the country, those farmers who are producing their crops on highlands, they can have their crops saved for them in order to feed the nation. The other impact of climate change is poor food security. You know, when the crop is washed away with the water, when the crop is attacked with pests, which are being brought in as a result of too much water, there is usually hunger. So the results of climate change are that there's hunger, there's low income, and then there's food insecurity in the country.
Thank you, Anna. Now